You've all been involved in horror at some point. So what got you interested in horror in the first place?
For me first, these guys got me interested in horror, actually. Working with these guys. I did my first ever horror movie with Andrew in 2004 called Headspace. And I thought, well, I better watch some, hadn't I, so that I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And since then, I've just, you know, got to understand it more through fans at FrightFest and critics and whatnot, and speaking to Lucky more, and now I understand the genre a lot better than I used to think it was kind of something a bit silly, and now I get how artful it can be.
Cool. Lucky and Andrew?
My fascination with horror films began when I was a child. Specifically, I remember my sister's birthday party when I was probably like 7 or 8 years old. We would rent a VCR because we didn't own one. We'd rent one. We'd get to rent one for our birthdays and get 3 movies. And one of our older cousins, this girl that lived in the city, convinced us to get horror movies, and we watched Carrie, The Hitcher, and Psycho 2 one night in the dark in my house in the country. And it was fantastic. So that's where my fascination started.
My fascination for horror started when I came out of my mother's vagina. And I realized that birth is a very scary thing. You have a lot of sunlight coming through your eyes, you're screaming, and you realize that there's a long journey ahead. No,
That's hard-hitting stuff.
No, really, the horror, divorced families and everything, you know, what a great way to escape and outlet all that anger. Really, I grew up in a building in Manhattan, this 1911 pre-war building, and, you know, Ira Levin actually had written Rosemary's Baby to be shot in my building there. And I always, you know, knew this. This is after I had, you know, been a little bit older, a teenager, and I thought that was interesting. So I actually watched Rosemary's Baby, which actually was shot down the street at Dakota. And it absolutely creeped me out. And it definitely, it made me interested in horror because it was so, you know, it was so well done too. It wasn't like some of the movies I had seen on Halloween TV specials, which, you know, I'd sneak up late and watch, you know, even though I was supposed to be in bed, like Friday the 13th, and of course, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street was a big one. And so I've always been intrigued with that, but I definitely think you know, Polanski and Rosemary's Baby was one of those films that gave me an appreciation for the genre. And then, you know, getting in to see The Shining, you know, that just stuck with me too, and got me to appreciate that you can make horror films that, you know, have these just big third characters that are not people, the environment. And I think both those films kind of emulate that very well. So,
you know what, that actually makes me think that I think my fascination with horror began with The Wizard of Oz. The Wicked Witch, the Wicked Witch,
yeah.
and those little goddamn monkeys. You know, they still scare the hell out of me. Like, yeah, and there's a deep dark magic in that film. You know, oof, my stomach is kind of singing right now. But yeah, The Wizard of Oz. That's where it started. Now that I think about it,
I was terrified by that film.
What are your thoughts on the controversy that's already been levelled at the film?
You answer this one. Don't hand me the mic.
My thoughts on it in retrospect, and now that we're here, is that it's been nothing but good for the film. One man freaking out at Sundance has been all the advertising we've needed. Everywhere we've gone to talk about the film, we've been asked about it.
Can you tell us what happened?
There was a gentleman in the audience, a local person from Utah, that I think decided to watch his last film of the day at the festival and didn't know what he was getting into. And he was quite disturbed by the content of the film. And I think after the film was over, he felt he had to stand up and speak for women. He has a little bit of the white knight syndrome, I think, which is kind of disturbing in its own way.
Touch, isn't it?
But he just blew a gasket. I mean, if you looked in the guy's eyes, the movie just deeply, deeply upset him. And he thought what we had done was wrong.
So, Andrew, you've directed as well as produced. How do you feel in those different roles as regards the films that you've done so far?
Well, you know, my mother was an art consultant, and she sold art for many years, so she always dealt with artists, and I grew up around artists, being dragged to galleries in New York City as a kid, and I'd always play in the artist studios, and it was kind of like, you know, these wild, fun, crazy people that I was around as a kid. And so when I got into going to film school at Emerson College in Boston, I realized that, you know, I essentially have the opportunity to do what my mom did many years, was really work with artists and sell art. You know, I mean, filmmaking and cinema is obviously commercial, as commercial as you could say, you know, art can get, unless you're Banksy or, you know, Damien Hirst. But, you know, I think the great thing about cinema and film is that you get to work with all these creative minds, and right from the PA on the set up to the actor, up to the director. And so for me, I've always been intrigued by producing because it's in my blood. You know, we're Dutch. You know, I'm a Dutch descendant, so I you know, we don't want to, you know, own anything. We want to trade mostly. And so as a producer, I do a lot of trading, and it's cool. Producing is in my blood. Directing has been a great way for me to respect and learn and understand more about actors. I did act for quite some time when I was younger, and I think directing is something that really allows me to be a better producer. And so it's a muscle that I have to keep working on. And so it makes me a better person too, because I understand everyone in a different level. And it's a very psychological. Direction is, you know, really being a leader that everyone wants to work with. Not everybody wants to work with a producer, unfortunately.
Talk more about this muscle.
Yeah, tell us about the muscle.
Yeah.
Well, it's about an inch long, and when it gets excited, it's about 8 inches long.
Keep flexing.
A grower, not a shower.
A grower, not a shower.
So this one's for Lucky.
Oh.
Can you tell us about your previous work and how it's led to this film? You know, particularly stuff like May and Masters of Horror.
In a strange way, no, not necessarily in a strange way, in a logical way. The Woman is kind of a culmination of all of those films, all the films that I've made up to this point. It's almost like a bookend that actually started with a movie called All Cheerleaders Die, a backyard zombie movie I made with my buddy Chris Sievertson, who's a great director in his own right. The Woman kind of represents all the things I learned, all the things I feel like I failed at. You know, it's got a little bit of everything that I've done, and also in addition to that, when we were creating the script, I had it ever present in my mind that we would do almost like a greatest hits of the themes that Jack Ketchum is, you know, obviously fond of in his stories. So it's almost like Ketchum's greatest hits and Lucky's greatest hits sort of mixed together, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. How do you feel the combined, your work and Ketchum's work combined to create The Woman?
Well, we both really identified with each other's work, I think, and that made the collaboration just kind of natural and organic. You know, like particularly one of his novels, Red, which I was very, very fond of. I read that book and I was like, that's the kind of story that I like to write. You know, so it just made sense to attempt to start making some of these things. So and to be able to write a story, a novel, and a screenplay from the ground up with you know, such a great guy and great novelist like that was just, you know, I mean, one of his mentors was Robert Bloch, you know, who you know, wrote Psycho. So it was a big honor, and I learned a lot, you know. I think, you know, he taught me a lot about storytelling and how to pace myself as a writer, and I might have taught him a thing or two about screenwriting. Yeah, it was just effortless collaboration. You know, I'm writing with a guy that's my father's age, you know, that comes from my father's generation. I think they're only about a year apart, actually. Mm-hmm. So I was really worried going into, you know, we agreed to do it, and I was really worried going into it that it was going to turn into like, no, kid, this is how it's done. But it wasn't like that at all. There's no egos, and neither of us tried to cram anything down each other's throats, and it was a really, really beautiful experience. I think we're going to do it many times, you know, many more times.
Pollyanna.
Yes.
One for you now.
Okay.
The final question.
I'm tying Lucky up with this. This is a nice change.
It's my turn.
The Woman is a particularly visceral role.
Yes.
I can't imagine that many actresses would have taken it on, to be honest, having seen it.
Possibly not, yeah.
So what was it that attracted you?
Well, I'd already worked on Offspring, so I'd already got to know this character, and my first introduction to her was reading the book Offspring by Ketchum, of course. And I had never read a horror book before, and I fell completely in love with it. I couldn't put it down. I mean, it went so far into each character's head that that it was fascinating, and it was so exciting. And so having got to know her by playing her in Offspring, I knew that this film was being written for me, and I knew that I was going to be working with a great director. And as soon as we started talking on the phone, and I kind of began to understand Lucky's take on it, and we talked about all the sort of tricky stuff, you know, that, like you say, probably a lot of actresses it would be put off by. And he's a really sensitive guy who really loves actors, and he's a great storyteller, and we just collaborated so well together. And there were no bumps, you know, by the time we got to filming. I had some of the most creative 4 months of my life, swapping notes with Lucky before we started shooting. So it felt like, you know, partly my baby too. So I was thrilled.
How did you prepare for it?
I went into the woods for a while alone, and sort of played around with a knife that I'd bought, and kind of felt how my body feels in that headspace, and away from our modern society where you kind of temper yourself to be attractive or liked or acceptable as a woman. And that was really fun. And then I studied animals a lot, both in the zoo and on documentary film, and I couldn't quite study them in the wild well enough. They seemed to stay away from me, except for this one bear when I was in the woods.
Back up a bit. The bear. What happened with the bear?
I was crossing a dry riverbed. I was in Big Bear in the summer when nobody's around, you know, of course, because it's a skiing place. And I was just worried about rattlesnakes, so I had cowboy boots on and I was tapping my stick to sort of make sure none of these rattlesnakes came out. And then I heard this from behind a tree, and it was really close. And I was sorry for the headphones, and I mean sorry for your ears. And I was shaken to the core, and I very slowly backed away with my little stick in my hand. I think I had pepper spray with me too, and I slowly.
More about this little stick.
Well, there may be a sequel to this interview.
Yeah.
And then I sort of ran as fast as I could to the car, and it was I was about an hour and a half into the woods at this point. And when I went to see the rangers, they said, "Yes, that would have been a bear, you stupid woman. What were you doing in the woods on your own at this time of the year?"
So you were 24/7 in the woods for 5 days or something?
Yeah.
What did you eat?
Oh, those horrible camping packs of food that you get, that dry food,
So you didn't
which
kill your
prepared
own.
me for being in the cellar with no food.
You didn't kill your own.
Prepared me for the catering on this movie.
Yeah, but what about the fish in the movie?
Oh, the fish in the movie. Yeah, do you remember that bit? There's a bit where I catch a fish early on,
Okay.
and it was amazingly set up by the prop master. So I had this knife in my hand, so I go like that, and then I pick up another knife with a fish on it, but it looks like I've just stabbed it and picked it up.
Motion,
It's
yeah.
all one motion. And there was a live fish in, oh God, we're going to get on, the animal rights are going to hate us. There's a live fish with a knife through it, you know, in the river, in this little sort of cage thing. And I was just really into it, and I pulled out the fish and I took a bite out of it. But of course I'm not a bear, so my teeth aren't strong enough, so my teeth just slid off of it, and I just had the worst flavour in my mouth for about 4 hours.
But you ate that fish too.
I did eat it later because I didn't think it was nice to kill it and not put it on the barbecue and, you know, enjoy it. I do fish, so I didn't feel too badly.